Brad, welcome to the Virtual CMO podcast. So glad you could join us today.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, that was a very quiet video. I don't know what happened there. Our soundtrack somehow wasn't attached to that video, so we'll have to clean that up in post-production. But normally it's a little peppier than that.
I got like the beginning, like during the countdown, I got some audio, and that was working for me. But yeah, I don't know what happened in the last part.
Yeah, something strange happened there. I'll have to look into that. But no matter, that's not the important part. The important part is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm really excited about this because you're a B2B content marketing expert, and we're going to really dive into the details of that a little bit today. But just to kind of kick things off here, I was hoping you could explain to the audience a little bit about your background and what you're doing in content marketing today.
Yeah, for sure. So my background is I worked in-house at a bunch of different companies. I did almost like all digital marketing roles. So from social media to paid to organic, and spent most of my time in SEO. Then transitioned on my own and was doing freelance kind of consulting in the SEO space. As you know, in the last 10 years or so, it's become really difficult and challenging and harder to do everything, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in this call. But started kind of really doubling down and focusing on content specifically because we found it was working for a lot of like technical B2B SaaS companies, all that kind of thing. And then have been like really doubling down in that area for the last, I don't know, 5 to 6 years or so. So we have a few companies now and doing a bunch of work with a bunch of big SaaS clients and that you're probably familiar with, and a lot of work in publishing and affiliates and all that kind of stuff too.
Sounds like you've been busy.
Yeah, you could say that for sure. It's exciting. It's never dull, which is good. I would like to sleep more at some point, but otherwise I can't complain,
Well, so much has changed, right, in this world over time. You used to be able to create some great content and pretty reliably rank. And now, the rules just seem to be consistently changing. Before we get into the details of like what good content is, what do you see as some of the big trends that are happening in terms of SEO and in terms of content development for an online strategy?
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot. And so SEO has always been like a zero-sum game where to get all the results, you have to be in the top 1 or 2 or 3 positions on, the most commercial terms in your space or the ones with the largest volume or whatever the case is. The challenge is it's getting harder and harder and harder for a lot of different reasons. So you have everything from Google, for instance, continuing to reward large brands. And so, for example, maybe at the end of last year, we had like a big rollout, especially in a lot of affiliate spaces where you essentially have a lot of massive publishers starting to rank much better than most kind of like niche or niche oriented sites. And the reason for that is they're just huge brands. So you have these like really large brands ranking for, you have like Forbes writing on like the best, CRM tools and all these types of like why would Forbes be writing and trying to publish for that kind of stuff? And it's because they're winning. Right. And so your competition anymore, your direct competition is getting better, savvier, more well-funded. That's not just your competition anymore, though. When it comes to ranking, your competition's also now the largest people in any kind of like media. The indirect competition is getting really difficult. You also have issues with Google specifically. So, for instance, they're actually answering queries with instant answers. Yep. So people are getting the answer to a query before actually you needing to click. They're essentially just scraping your site and copying your information and showing it to the public, so they don't have to click into your site to actually view it. They're also removing like quote unquote free listing spaces and prioritizing more, SERP real estate, for example, as paid ads and paid listings, because obviously that helps them more. And so you have all these like this confluence of events that are all happening at the same time. That's just making it way more difficult to actually rank, like you said, with content. It's at the point where just doing like pretty good or average content that used to work in the past, it's kind of going out.
What do you think about these rumors that Apple may be getting into the search engine game? Do you think there's a realistic possibility that might happen?
I do. I think if you look at like Siri, for instance, that's and how voice search is working, that's kind of replicating a similar idea. And they're recommending, so you can just quickly ask a question and quickly get a response. And so it's kind of the same dynamic being played out. It's not that far off from going inside Amazon and doing search inside Amazon for something specific, like an e-commerce product. So if you think about search from an SEO as like a broader perspective, I think it's only a matter of time before Google no longer is able to have the same monopoly that they currently do and have had for like too long. If you want to like really get down to it, it's only, and I think if you look at the like political sphere and how much attention now is being paid to big tech, because they're all kind of monopolies, if you think about it. And that's probably not a good thing for society. So I think it's only a matter of time before you have other big players like an Apple or someone else who starts jumping in and actually like trying to evolve. So I think that'll be the challenge. You won't see like a better Google. You'll see voice search become a bigger problem or like a bigger opportunity in that sense. So it'll be something similar but different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of what Google has been doing is trying to get into the content a little bit to expose more ways to find things. And I know that that's really a struggle when you think about things like web page design. Obviously, you want to design your web pages so that they have the relevant information so that Google can find it and rank it. But at the same time, we're in an era of video, right? Where there's so much video content, people want to see things, watch things more than they want to read things. And so that sort of messes with the whole ability to get things to rank if you have a very video heavy content, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think it's a big problem because it's also to the way they are able to scan and index text-based content is so good, but it's different than how you could apply that same thing to video, at least at this point in time. So actually one of the things we're doing and one of the things we're recommending is kind of having to do both for the time being. And it's not a great answer, but it's kind of like the practical answer if you will. So we will do long detailed guides for text because that's what works well for search. That being said, I'm not under any illusions that people want to sit down and read 10,000 word, buying guides. So we're actually doing video summaries and snippets on top of and in line with that same content. And so it's like, how can we create video or other types of media to actually like satisfy users and to give them like the 2-minute takeaway and top summaries, but how can we still do the text and flesh that out to kind of play both angles? Which
is the challenge, right? For a lot of businesses is you're just doing more. What used to be able to be a single work stream, now it's multiple work streams, multiple channels that you have to support to get this content out there. And it's really adding a lot of work. Marketing is getting increasingly complex.
It is. Yeah, it's hard. It's funny because like on the one hand, it's an awesome opportunity because the amount of money you consider it takes to do what we're talking about pales in comparison still to like commercials, radio, like that old way of doing things. However, it is getting so much more challenging and so much more dynamic in that, like we're talking about, you have to do video design. So for example, our team, we're not just using good writers, we're using good writers plus designers plus video people plus like producers to like work with the post-production. So it is becoming challenging, and it's not good enough to just say, well, just do less. Because the challenge there is if we are living in this zero-sum world, if you just do, let's say, one really good piece of content a week, yes, that's good and that's helpful, but you better hit a home run on each and every piece, which may or may not happen. And you better make sure that how are we going to be able to do just one a week and still hit the scale we need to scale a business into 7, 8, 10, 20 figures, if that makes sense. So we might be able to do one article and then get, a couple leads a month, a couple customers a month, but how are we going to scale that into like hundreds and thousands? That's where it becomes a challenge and where you inevitably need to do more too.
So, we target this podcast at SMB, small, medium-sized businesses. Many of them have really not embarked on a blog strategy, or if they have, it's all over the place. They just write whatever is on their mind. And many times it's very product focused. There's a lot of talk about what they do as opposed to articles of interest outside of their product suite or their skill set. When a company is considering embarking on a blogging strategy to really try to drive that SEO traffic, what do you advise them? What are some of the initial considerations that they should think about before they get into it?
Cool. Yeah, there's a few. You see this a lot with B2B companies. So for example, if any B2B site owner or business owners listening to this, if you just went into Google Analytics, for example, if you just go in and look at what's actually bringing people to my site, like in general, what's actually bringing people to my site, it's usually going to be branded traffic, meaning they are typing your address in directly. They're searching for your brand name. So they're literally going to Google and typing in your brand name and then clicking to your website. For a lot of especially smaller B2B companies, that's the vast majority. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it means you are creating a good brand and people are becoming aware of you in the space and they're coming to search for you directly. It's a bad thing because it's almost like a glass ceiling because there's only so many people that are going to be searching for that over time.
Right.
So you need to kind of extrapolate out and figure out, okay, well, what does my product or service actually do for people? One of the things we recommend when we're writing content is an old copywriting or advertising formula called problem, agitate, solution. So in other words, if my product is the solution, what's actually the various problems that we're solving for these people? And usually you just get that by talking to customers, by looking at support requests, by talking to customer service. You'll usually see a lot of different things where people will come in and they'll say, I'm trying to do XYZ, or in my day-to-day business, my personal metrics or my company metrics are this. Like, how do we do this better or faster or cheaper or more effectively or whatever that case is? You want to position your product or service and brand as the solution, but you do need to figure out and do a better job of tying it back to what are the actual different unique pain points or problems that people are searching for and looking for. Usually you find this by doing some basic keyword research. The easiest way to do that and still connect it to a commercial intent back to actually selling some stuff is just to actually test ads. So go into Google search go into Google AdWords, try to run ads in your space. You don't need to spend a lot of money, but actually try to figure out what are the most expensive keywords in my space. Okay. And that is usually a pretty good indicator of what content you should be creating. So for instance, best CRM product is probably going to be pretty expensive. Sure. But then if you extrapolate out from that, it's going to be HubSpot CRM versus Salesforce CRM or Salesforce CRM alternatives. And then if you extrapolate out a little further, it's going to be how do I automatically connect purchase data to my CRM? And there's going to be all these very specific questions that are more information based. And I think that's kind of the shining light moment from a content perspective of how to connect all the dots from helping these people at the beginning of the searches all the way down to when they're going to actually buy the product from you.
So if you did an article, and again, this would be a difficult one to rank for, but if you did something best CRM solutions for small business, something like that, and you were a CRM solution provider, you could mention yourself as well as your competitors within the article, but do you always recommend that they do that sort of in, a quote unquote non-biased way, and then maybe in a sidebar or maybe in an ad, a call to action inserted in the middle of the blog post that is clearly different from the content that you say, well, try our CRM for free?
Definitely. Yeah, I do. The short answer is yes, and I'll explain that. The long answer is you also need to just double check. A lot of it will also depend on what's actually ranking already. So if you typed in best CRM for a small business, I think it was, if you actually go look at the content already ranking, you're probably going to find a lot of those kind of competitor or alternative comparisons. So the top 10 tools and then what they're good at, pros and cons. That's usually pretty common content format. So if that's what you already see ranking, then the short answer is, yeah, you should probably mention yourself too. The trick is to do it in a way that's not biased, but that you're also not calling people out where it makes sense. So for instance, you can do it very legitimately and just say, these tools are better for these reasons, or for these types of customers. We're better for these reasons, or for these types of customers. So what's the action? And this comes back to the company positioning and product positioning, which is often a bigger discussion outside that marketing doesn't always, have influence over, but hopefully you should, and hopefully you're able to weigh in on that, because there should be tangible benefits other than price between using you versus a competitor, and there should be a better fit for some types of customers for using you versus competitors, again, other than just being a race to the bottom and the cheapest price.
No, I think that's really good. One thing that's always an interesting discussion with businesses is you get into this idea of what do we want to rank for? Maybe these are the keywords or the long tail keywords that we want to rank for. You write some, what you believe is compelling content to go after it. You let it churn for a little while, and then you go and look at the results and you say, well, wait a minute, I'm ranking for other things. I'm not ranking for the things that I went after. What do you suggest people do if all of a sudden an article that they wrote for one purpose is now ranking for something different?
Yeah, it's a good question. If it's ranking really well for that other thing that you didn't intend, I would almost say leave it and try again, because I don't want to break what's the expression? I don't want to break something that's not broken, or fix something that's not broken. Yeah, exactly. So that's one consideration of like, is it actually working pretty well for that other thing? Even if we didn't mean it, let's leave it and let's create a brand new attempt at the old thing, at the original thing. The other bigger 2 points to look at are, number one, did you actually do a good job of matching that search intent, what we talked about a second ago? So if you go back and look at the original stuff already ranking for that page, did you do a good job of aligning your content with that? So for instance, if you see a search engine result page, if you see a SERP that has 10 out of 10 on the first page are all list posts, and yours is a product feature page, then that's not gonna match well, and you're probably gonna rank for something different, something more product oriented as opposed, or feature oriented, as opposed to, you know, the list post ranking for this keyword. So that's one issue, is like, does my actual content actually line up with what's already kind of performing in that direction? The other thing to look at is, how are you citing or referencing or driving traffic to this thing? So for instance, if you're not doing link building or PR, but you naturally happen to get a link or some PR that's referencing your piece of content in a way that you didn't intend, sometimes that helps like shape the understanding of that content, if that makes any sense. So can you kind of like steer people back in the right direction? And so, for example, we see this all the time where, let's say a client of ours had a piece of content that they wanted to rank for like something more commercial, but they kept getting almost like support related links or mentions from other sites just naturally. But the problem is, it makes it come off or sound more like a support and a frequently asked questions type piece of content, as opposed to a more commercial intent, like, no, we actually want to rank for like a CRM type product page to get people in here to buy. And so that's another potential issue where it's almost like, how do we, again, if we are doing PR, if we are doing link building and that sort of thing, how do we do a better job of like shaping? It doesn't need to be an exact anchor text for the people that do know all the nerdy SEO stuff. It doesn't need to be like an exact anchor text every single time, but it does need to be a little more in line with like what you want that page to rank for, not necessarily like how people are perceiving it.
Well, I think a lot of businesses, you know, they use the tools that they have in front of them. So if you're a WordPress user, you're probably using, you know, a Yoast SEO plugin, or you're using a Rank Math or something like that. And I think oftentimes, you know, they say, what's the keyword that you're going for? You plug it in and it scores you based on that. But that's not, you know, going to Google, right, and saying, okay, please rank this page for this particular keyword because it's the one you put in. But I think that's the way a lot of people think it works.
Yeah, and the issue with that, from like a practical standpoint, is those tools will tell you you're doing a good job because they're measuring something very small and specific and tactical, and you think they're measuring something else. So in other words, you are looking at, I want this piece of content to rank for this very specific term, and so those tools will just check very basic things like, did you use that keyword in your title tag? Or did you use your keyword in the H2, like a header? Or in the, did you add alt image attributes to your images? And did you describe them? And are they related to this? So you may have done those things, and you may get like 100% or like a green light or an A+ or whatever from a very tactical standpoint. But then if you think about what search and what Google and all these things are trying to do from a broader standpoint, they're getting much better at inferring intent. So they're getting much better at going beyond just that one keyword that you were optimizing for, and actually understanding what someone's searching for and how do we surface that. So for instance, engineers, let's say you typed in like engineer salary. Okay. Well, that could mean software engineer, that could mean civil engineer, that could mean electrical engineer. Those are all very different types of content and websites and everything else. But if you were just on your page, if you were just optimizing for engineer salary, and you tick those boxes of like putting in your title, putting it in all these different things, Yoast will tell you you did a good job. but Google will sit there and look at it and say, well, how do I know this? They mean, like, what type of engineer are they looking for? Where are they located? So engineer salaries where? Like in the US, in the world, in certain sectors or certain verticals. Like, so when you start thinking of all those like extra challenges and problems, hopefully it gives you kind of a green light where it's like, oh, actually we're answering a much broader problem here. We're not just trying to optimize for that one specific keyword, anymore.
I think a lot of people get frustrated sometimes when, they build some content. They feel it's great content. They've done the research, the posts are an appropriate length. And then they go and look at the search results and they've got some competitors ahead of them. And you look at the page and there's nothing to it. It's a very short article. It's a very short page. It doesn't seem to have a whole lot of value, but sometimes it's ranked more highly than your own page. How do you take a more aggressive stance toward that and said, okay, we're going to go and we're going to take that one out? We need to rank higher than that page because that page is of no value.
Definitely. Yeah, I think there's a few approaches. We like to look at it almost as like a balanced scorecard idea. Okay. So in other words, there might be, let's say, 5 variables that's holding you back. Which one of those 5 is the problem? So is the content good? Is it written well? Is it informed? Is it insightful? Is it long enough? Does it actually match the intent of the searcher? So just like this problem we're talking about now, it might be a very good piece of content, but does it actually line up with what is actually ranking and what people are wanting to see? If not, can we tweak it? So can we add things? You don't necessarily have to like do a full rewrite or revamp, but can we tweak things, improve things, whatever? Links and PR and promotion is usually the other side of the equation, because there's 2 issues here. Number one, how large are the competitors you're going against? That's always going to be a problem. So if your site, if you're using, we like to use, I'm sure people are hopefully familiar with concepts like domain authority or domain rating, just in general. We use it as like a proxy for brand awareness. So in other words, if you're a good regional company, but you're trying to rank for something against Home Depot, it's always going to be hard. Even if Home Depot sucks, even if their website sucks, even if the page sucks, even if the content sucks, even if your product's better, it's always going to be hard because everyone knows them and nobody knows who you are outside of a zip code, So that's always a problem. The roundabout or the other side of it is how much authority or traffic or whatever you're driving to this specific page versus that specific page. So when you kind of peel back the onion from the full site and brand awareness to like actually that individual URL, often what you can exploit, hopefully, is more PR, more link building, more editorial mentions, more paid social distribution to try to drive traffic to that individual URL over the other one. And that's usually where you can try to outcompete them too. Because again, they're probably going to, if it's a big site too, they're probably going to beat you on just site awareness and branding. So maybe on a page specific level, you can outflank them by driving a lot more awareness and traffic and interest to that individual URL, again, relative to whatever that site is.
The conversation about link building, I think, is interesting. As your site begins to grow, you begin to build that domain authority. All of a sudden, you start getting these emails in your inbox from people who say, hey, I happen to read your really good article about XYZ. Would you be interested in including a link to our page, which talks about this, a similar topic? What do you think about that? I mean, obviously, everybody wants to build links. Those backlinks are really important. If it's appropriate, should you do it? Is there a downside to adding those links?
It depends. The good news is you can probably ignore most of those and have them go somewhere else. Think of link building like you need votes. Like you need people actively voting for you and vouching for you that you do know what you're talking about. And if you don't get those and your brand isn't Home Depot, you're always going to struggle. Like it's always going to be a problem of essentially visibility, of making sure that you get the votes and the enough credit to actually be considered to compete against those types of big brands. Yep. So if you're not doing any sort of link building, yes, you need to do something. The good news is you don't need to do link building in like an awful way. You can do it in like a PR way. You can do it in a promotional way. You can sponsor things. You can run contests. Like there's all different types of ideas where you can do it in like an organic way that brings you traffic. It brings you other things other than just the link. Those types of emails that you're referencing today only really work for unsophisticated audiences. And when I say unsophisticated, I just mean less tech savvy, because in the more tech heavy industries, everyone has already seen those millions of times, and they probably already get 10 a day. And so the problem with chasing tactics like that is you're too late probably. So the time that worked, you're exploiting like this little arbitrage, this little area, window of time when that worked. Probably the best time to do that was like 3 years ago. If everyone's doing it today, the best results probably came 3 years ago. So if everyone's doing, it's the same with LinkedIn too. It's like if everyone's doing something a specific way, it's probably going to become saturated if it isn't already, and it's already commoditized, and you're always going to struggle to stand out. So you probably should be looking at other ideas. So for example, we worked at a travel company a long time ago. We ran like a campaign where we like sent bloggers on a road trip. And then we did another one where we sent customers to like a free trip to like different cities. And there's different ways you can be really clever and get other businesses involved. And then you just contribute your product or service, and it doesn't cost you anything out of pocket. Like there's very easy ways to do this if you just get creative. I think it's just making it compelling. So even if you work in like, quote unquote boring industry, well, how do you make it interesting or not boring then? How do you tie it back to something in the news? How do you tie it back to something that your customers actually really do enjoy or like? That's always the challenge here, and getting creative with that. And if you do come up with something, there's no shortage of ways where you can do videos or do content or do contests or promotions or work with journalists and bloggers. Do something interesting. It's always about finding what that unique, interesting kind of angle or hook is.
It seems like such an effort too, to have somebody, researching these articles, finding out who to email, sending that email out, following up multiple times just for a single backlink. And rarely do they offer much in return other than saying, we've got this valuable piece of content. So it helps them more than it really helps you. Right. Mm-hmm. And I look at other things that people could be doing. And just like you're here on this podcast today, there'll be show notes. They'll have your links in there. You're going to get a backlink from this like automatically. And you're also adding value at the same time. It's a much more efficient use of your time, and the value will be greater than it seems like that effort of going out and hunting for those backlinks.
For sure. Yeah. Think about scale for everything. So for instance, like you're suggesting, swapping one-to-one links with someone, it might help a little bit, but it's not going to help like at the end of the day and really move the needle. So what you need to figure out is, okay, well, how do I do things, or how do I focus my time and effort and money on things that are going to provide lots of different returns? So traffic, brand awareness, credibility, and links. So how can I piggyback link building on top of the stuff we're already doing? Or how can I leverage my activity a little more so it makes sense? So in other words, like this idea with this, if you ran one contest and then you tried to get like 10 bloggers involved, well, there's 10 bloggers that could potentially link to you because you're trying to run a contest to get them involved. Then how can I also take that one contest and go talk about it socially? How can I get other companies involved in the same promotion? So it's like 4 different companies are sponsoring it. So all those 4 people are also going to link to it. And then how am I going to go pitch this idea to like a couple different blogs in this space or journalists to cover, because it's interesting and unique and it's different, and journalists always need something interesting to talk about. So all of a sudden, one campaign or idea is above and beyond the traffic and brand awareness. You're looping in like, 10 different entities. That could be 10 different links right off the bat for one simple campaign, And so you got to think about how do I leverage our activities better so that we are getting the volume and quantity, but we're doing it in a smart way that leverages our time and investment, not in kind of a, quote unquote dumb way where we just have like a VA or an intern sending out hundreds of emails of, a week and spamming people.
It's so true. One of the things that I think is a hindrance too for many businesses when they think about a real content strategy is it's intimidating, right? They have to write a lot. And so then they say, well, there are all these companies out there that are SEO companies, that are content companies that say, well, we'll help you. We'll create those blog posts. We'll do those articles for you. We'll create that content. But they're not experts in your field most of the time. Now, maybe they have a general knowledge, depending on what the industry is. But for some, they need a little bit more expertise. So when you're a business and you're saying, I don't have time to write all this stuff myself, I need to get somebody in here to do it. Yeah, you can get a VA to do it, but that's probably going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, right? Just because of the learning curve. So how do you find the right companies to work with in order to create the kind of content that's really going to be valuable, that are going to be able to provide enough value in that content that people are going to actually search for it and find it?
Totally. Yeah, yeah. I would bring it back to budget probably. And the reason I say that is because, like you're saying, you can find experts. They're not cheap.
Right.
So for example, my company Codeless works with a lot of big SaaS companies. We have specific subject matter experts in finance because we work with a lot of big companies. It's not cheap because those subject matter experts by definition are expensive. Another way to think of it is like, let's say you wanted a really good piece of investment content. If someone was that good of an investor in their day-to-day, they probably don't need to freelance write at night to bring in extra money. And or they're doing that, but they're doing it with a vested interest, meaning they already own something that they're bringing attention back to. So they're already, the reason they write content on big sites is because they have a business in that space and they make money on equity and distributions and not on like freelance writing. And so there's a fine line you have to walk when you're looking for those subject matter experts, and it's difficult, and that's why it is expensive. So it's worth it if you can find those people and work with them, and if you have the money. If you don't, because content is a long-term game, it's not like a 1 month thing where you're going to be blown away next month by all the results. It's going to take 6 months, 12 months to kind of ramp up. The other alternative there that I would recommend is definitely find ghostwriters, freelance writers, have them interview you or interview people on your team. And so doing a call like this, for instance, it's usually a lot easier. And that way that the writer, for example, can help you figure things out like, well, what are people looking for in the space? If someone's looking for best CRM for small business, what are the top 3 questions that they're asking, or that feature in the other types of content? So like, I don't know. As you can tell, I don't use a lot of CRMs, but what is, so I'm having trouble coming up with a good example, but like, if you're talking about best CRM for small business, obviously one of those considerations is price. They want to figure out monthly seats. So is it price per user? Is it price per team? Another one might be like automated email follow-up sequences. Another one might be integrations with other tools that I'm using. So what are those like top things that people want to know about? And then have the writer interview you, so then I can sit here as a subject matter expert and just rattle a bunch of stuff off in the course of 30 minutes to an hour. And then they can actually craft it and make it sound good on paper. Because a lot of times subject matter experts, especially the more technical spaces you get into, the more dry and boring they get.
Yes.
And they struggle more with the narrative of like, how do I connect this? They're so product focused and brand focused. They have trouble putting themselves in the customer's shoes. Not dumbing it down, but it's the problem of being too close to it and being too much of an expert. And assuming things that the customer knows that they don't in reality. And that's where you need the outside perspective from. So have a writer sit down with you for 30 minutes a week, have them ask you questions on specific topics. You give them your point of view, record the whole thing, get the transcript, and then have a writer go through and actually write out from your transcript, because then they're able to use your real words and the way you speak too. So for instance, I often talk in this like clipped way, and where I don't always explain like full formal sentences. I just I just informally like go through, staccato. And so if I wanted someone to write that for me, I would probably what usually happens is people want to see something that would sound like them. And so you kind of need to like hear it and understand how that person would actually say it in reality, and talking to them is the best way to do that. So that's usually kind of like the best win-win. Again, there's a little bit of a working out the kinks period where you still probably will need to review the content initially, still provide some feedback of like, I would say it this way, not this way, or actually what I said here, I really meant this. There's usually that kind of a process that needs to happen. But that's often the best way to do it, and to kind of bridge that gap between, a budget-friendly writer with something that's you're still gonna be happy with, and you're still gonna get you some results at the end of the day.
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of shortcuts to this process. When we started doing these podcasts, we started to look at, well, we can take the transcript and turn that into an article. That's actually a lot harder than it sounds, because just as you said, you don't speak in the same way that you would write. And so the flow of things isn't the same way that you would write it. So there are elements there, and you can pull things out, but it's a big rewrite to do all that. There was one other thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on today before we wrap up. And as you were rattling off those things in this CRM example about what somebody could write about from an interview, it made me think a lot about pillar pages and pulling up content underneath that pillar to really drive up that authority. Do you still think in 2021 that pillar pages are worth the investment? Because it's a lot of content that you need to create good content to create a good pillar page, right?
It is. It is. I do. As you're saying, it's harder and it's more time and money and all the things. Again, think of this as leverage. So piggyback on the last example, if you're going to sit down with a writer for an hour, that should result in like 3 or 4 different articles. That shouldn't just result in one article. And so think about leverage as much as you can. But that means you actually have to do the research, or someone needs to do the research beforehand to identify those 5 potential topics in this one area, or those 20 potential topics in one area. And then do a little bit of research to figure out what those questions are, supporting materials, how all the dots connect. In other words, like how one question here might relate to one question here. Almost map that out in like a mind map or like a Excel sheets or something just very simple. And then when you sit down and do your interview, you do it like 1 hour a week, or maybe you do like 3 hours in a month, one time. That results in 20 different articles. And so you're leveraging your time as much as possible. So you, the subject matter expert or the owner or whoever, it might only cost you in time. You're usually short on time is usually your biggest problem. So I know I am anyway. So that's 3 hours out of the month. Actually not that big of a deal, because it would take you, if you sat down and wrote an article, it should take you 3 to 4 hours. And if it doesn't, you're not putting enough into it. And you probably don't have 3 to 4 hours to spend per article times 20 articles a month. That's a crazy amount of time. So how can you spend personally 2 hours, 3 hours a month on this one thing, but increase the output, get 10 articles out of it, 20 articles out of it? That's always going to be the key, is to figure out those kind of leverage points and processes and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. You want to leverage your time for sure. I'm interested too on the technology side. I use a tool called StoryChief that allows me to collaborate with other writers, build my articles, and then have them imported into my WordPress. And you offer a tool as well. Tell me a little bit about that.
We do, yeah. So Wordable, we're getting ready to relaunch. I think it's been around since 2016. We actually bought it last year and have rebuilt it and are kind of re-releasing it. It historically takes Google Docs and imports them direct. So it sounds similar, directly into WordPress. What we're trying to do is add a bunch of the kind of nerdy SEO stuff and the time-consuming stuff. So for example, one benchmark we give is, and that we see internally from doing this for a bunch of big clients, is it usually should take you around 30 minutes to an hour per article to upload, format, optimize, and then publish.
Okay.
To do it manually. And if it's not, that usually means you're missing a lot of steps. So you're not optimizing a post properly. Your formatting is going to be bad. Your images are going to be huge because you're not like optimizing them, and that's going to slow down your site. So there's all these problems, or you're not using enough images. Like, oh, I'm able to do it in 5 minutes because I could just copy and paste the content. There's no images. Well, your people want to see images. Your people want to see video. Like, so it's kind of like forcing in a lot of those things that most people don't want to do, or that take a long time, and just trying to automate the whole process. And then we're setting it up to work with essentially any like website content management system. So not just WordPress, but if you're using e-commerce platforms like yeah, exactly, HubSpot, BigCommerce, all that kind of stuff. And then also help you bring in content from any other tool. So historically, it works really well with Google Docs because Google Docs is easy. A lot of people collaborate on there too. Yep. But if you have writers that working in one specific tool, like a writing app like Ulysses on Mac devices, or some people still love like Microsoft Office files or Word files, and those don't always play nice with other things. So we're trying to kind of like let you import, optimize, publish content in seconds, in bulk too. So if you're doing, like, we often do 20 articles at a time for a client because we just batch our stuff. And doing, as you could imagine, that's kind of like soul-sucking, tedious work. If you're trying to do that for 20 articles at one time, that's like multiple days worth of work for some poor person. And so we're just trying to automate that whole process for people. And again, that's Wordable.io.
Hey, that sounds fascinating, and it sounds like it's solving a real world problem. And I'll make sure that we put that in the show notes, the link for it. Hey, as we're wrapping up here, I'd love it if you could just share with people where they can find you on the web and the companies that you work for. With so many balls in the air at one time, I'm sure there are a couple of places, but where do you want people to find you?
Yeah, definitely. Wordable.io, we just talked about, is our newest tool we'd be kind of re-releasing here soon. I'm on LinkedIn at BS Marketer. Those are my initials. But also marketing's kind of, BS sometimes, if we're all being honest. I also run Codeless, and I'm a partner at Usurp, which is Codeless is a content production agency. Usurp is a PR and digital link building company. I'm on LinkedIn. As you can imagine, I'm not super social on the socials because I don't have time because I'm doing too many things already. But one of those places will usually get you back to me at some way.
Hey, that's perfect. I'll make sure that we put all those in the show notes. Hey, Brett, this has really been an interesting discussion. It's a topic that, I certainly have with all of my clients because, if you can execute a good content strategy, it can pay dividends for years to come. And so it's a worthwhile investment. And so I really appreciate the tips that you've shared with us today and some of the strategies.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope it was helpful and somewhat interesting to people listening.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you again.
Thanks.